Thanks for staying with us. Time now for African News with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Liberia earmarks the last doses of an experimental drug for 2 physicians suffering from Ebola. Doctors warn that the WHO's decision to green light untested treatments is still fraught with ethical pitfalls as doses are in short supply. Also, UN envoys in South Sudan say they're not optimistic about leaders in the country's bloody crisis finding a compromise to end violence anytime soon. This despite the camps of both President Salva Kiir and rebel chief Riek Machar having been threatened with sanctions. And conservationists warn that Ugandans' reliance on wood charcoal is burning a hole through the country's forests. One sustainable energy company is hoping to change attitudes after cooking up their own charcoal recipe. First up, the last known doses of the experimental drug ZMapp arrived in Liberia today. They will be given to 2 doctors suffering from the deadly Ebola virus, making them the first Africans to receive the treatment. This follows the WHO's decision yesterday to allow untested drugs in the fight back against an Ebola outbreak that has killed more than 1,000 people in West Africa. Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea have been hit the hardest, and Nigeria today has confirmed a 3rd death. Well, Nika Alexander from the WHO's Ebola Outbreak Coordination Centre in Conakry tells us about the challenges of dealing with experimental treatments.
The panel of experts, there were ethical experts and medical experts, looked at a range of issues. And one of the ones was, basically, how and when should you use something that hasn't been treated in humans yet? There are some promising treatments out there that haven't been tested on humans yet. And even if it is permitted to go ahead, who gets them? When will they get them? Who do you prioritize? Is it healthcare workers who've put their lives at risk? There are lots of difficult questions, and in fact, it's not over yet. There'll be another meeting of experts later this month, I think, or next month to consider the remaining questions. But what happens now, what changes now is very little on the ground. What changes is the experts, the pharmaceutical companies, governments can start to look at what other options they have. But we're still months and months away before any kind of new treatment arrives on the ground.
Nika Alexander there speaking to us a little earlier on. Well, Guinea-Conakry's so far suffered the most Ebola fatalities. We've spoken to expats living here in Paris who are following developments back home closely and say that they're worried about the families and friends they left behind.
Young Ghanaians gathered in Paris to campaign against Ebola. We met the head of the organisation in Paris's most popular Ghanaian restaurant. He's just organised fundraising events to help his fellow countrymen.
We bought medical supplies and will send them in a few days to Conakry.
Many Ghanaians now hesitate to travel home.
Some people told me they won't go to Guinea because of Ebola. And I have no holidays now, but if I did, I would have cancelled them.
Umu Barry opened this restaurant 20 years ago. Never has she seen such a health crisis in Guinea, and the topic is on everyone's lips here.
Everyone is talking about Ebola. We watch the news. Everyone is worried. Not only for Guinea. This virus can reach everyone.
Many say the authorities aren't doing enough to combat the virus.
You can't tell people not to eat bushmeat when they have nothing else to eat. Aid workers must go in the bush, in the forest. We must not wait for the virus to reach the capital, Conakry.
Since the beginning of the year, Guinea has been the country the most hit by Ebola, with nearly 400 deaths, and Ghanaians abroad are increasingly worried.
In other news, Spain's Red Cross has warned it has never, in one day, dealt with a bigger influx of African migrants after 920 people were rescued from the Gibraltar Strait. Officials near the immigrants' arrival point of Tarifa fear running out of space to house them, and more than 500 people have been sent to cope with the flow. Italy's Navy has also rescued more than 1,400 people over the last 24 hours or so. Mediterranean nations are struggling to cope with unprecedented numbers of people making the dangerous sea journey from Africa to southern Europe. In South Africa, a jailed apartheid death squad leader is challenging the decision to postpone considering him for parole. Eugene de Kock, known as Primeval, is believed to have been responsible for more atrocities than any other man in trying to preserve white minority rule. He became eligible for release last month after spending 20 years in jail, but a judge put off the decision, saying families had not been properly consulted. De Kock's lawyer is challenging the argument in court, saying it's legally flawed. The UN's not holding out much hope that leaders in South Sudan's crisis will settle on a compromise anytime soon. Security Council envoys were in the troubled nation this week, hoping to pressure or convince President Salva Kiir and former Vice President Riek Machar to end fighting, in which thousands have died this year.
Pressure from the United Nations on the two opposing sides in South Sudan has so far proved to have little effect. A delegation from the Security Council on a mission to Juba has not succeeded in bringing protagonists President Salva Kiir and rebel leader Riek Machar any closer together. Now, UN officials are issuing warnings.
The Security Council expresses its readiness to consider, in consultations with relevant parties, including IGAD and the African Union, all appropriate measures, including targeted sanctions, against those who take action that undermines the peace, stability and security of South Sudan.
People who spoil the peace agreement, people who commit gross violations of human rights, must be held accountable.
Security Council officials were also very unhappy with events in Addis Ababa on Monday. A meeting between government and rebel representatives produced next to nothing. The two parties separated without agreeing on how to enact the accord to end the hostilities signed several months ago.
The parties agreed, but the rebels came up with another position demanding the withdrawal of the foreign forces from South Sudan.
The strategic city of Malakal on the banks of the White Nile River has been sorely affected by the conflict between President Salva Kiir and former Vice President Riek Machar. Since the fighting began on December 15th, thousands of people have been killed and more than 1.5 million chased from their homes. The United States has just allocated another $180 million to deal with the ongoing humanitarian crisis in the world's newest country.
In Uganda, wood charcoal is sometimes called black gold, but conservationists believe the fuel costs more than it's worth. It's burning a hole through forests, and the UN reckon it's the biggest cause of deforestation in the country. Most Ugandans use it daily, but one sustainable energy company is trying to get people to consider an alternative. Sarah Sacco sent us this report from Kampala.
A paste made with cassava flour glues the vegetable peel and charcoal dust together. This 100% green recipe belongs to a small factory on the outskirts of Kampala that produces eco-friendly charcoal. Green Bioenergy has industrialised this durable fuel since 2012. It's unique in Uganda. These small bricks burn much longer than traditional carbon and don't produce smoke. But more than that, their production respects the environment.
We collect waste from Kampala, from other urban centres. We bring it here, we process it. You can see the raw material is different. We don't use the forest as the other people do. It's green and green energy.
A green energy taking on a huge market dominated by traditional charcoal. 90% of Ugandans use this as fuel, at the expense of air pollution and shrinking forests. Charcoal consumption is increasing yearly along with the country's urbanisation, and the prices regularly skyrocket. Green Bioenergy's ability to change mentalities relies largely on local communities, like here, in this neighbourhood north of the capital, where 25 residents have acquired these machines and received training from the company.
When I started, it cost me a lot of money, but once I learned how to make the briquettes, I saved a lot in charcoal consumption. Now I'm even saving money and people are coming to see me to buy this charcoal.
The young French entrepreneurs behind Green Bioenergy are now developing new products, just like these revamped kilns that use 30% less fuel.
We're always looking to improve our products to prevent the emission of gases like CO2. So our kilns, for example, they allow us to get the most out of our briquettes or charcoal. So that means less CO2 emissions and less deforestation.
Over the last 10 years, An estimated 15% of Uganda's deforestation has been due to charcoal production.
Well, that wraps up African News from me. Stay with us, though. Short break and news and headlines from around the world coming up.